Hello, and welcome to the Poetry Soundbite, a new series of poetry readings and interviews available on As It Ought to Be magazine. I'm Chase Dimock, managing editor of As It Ought to Be magazine, proud to host our second installment of the series with Bunkong Tuon. In a quick and tidy 30 minutes, we will learn a little bit about him, hear some of his poems, and explore how he crafts his work. Our poem selections and questions came from my students in my Intro to Poetry class, who are helping me put together these interviews as part of our Living Poet project. I thought this would be a cool way to teach poetry as a living, vital art form and to get to know actual living poets. So let me introduce our guest today. Bunkong Tuon is a Cambodian American writer and critic. He is the author of Gruel and So I Was Blessed, both published by NYQ Books, The Doctor Will Fix It by Shabda Press, and Dead Tongue, a chapbook with Joanna C. Valente from Yes Poetry. He teaches at Union College in Schenectady, New York. That's an easy word to say. And he tweets at Bunkong Tuon. And I wanted to say just a little bit more about my relationship with him and an appreciation, because about 4 years ago, in fact, 4 years ago this month, the founding editor of As It Ought to Be magazine, Okla Elliott, passed away, and he was one of my closest friends. And that's how I got this job, was actually as the inheritor of the magazine as he passed away. And so I didn't have a lot of connections in the literary world. I was just starting to creatively write myself. And shortly after that, after I took over, Bunkong, he reached out to me, and he offered to put some of his poems on my site. He talked about how he had put on a poem a few years before, and Okla had graciously accepted it. And it meant a lot to me, the way that he stepped forward and supported me and honored the memory of one of my closest friends. And so we've been corresponding ever since. And in fact, his blurb appears on the back of my first book of poetry. So I've really appreciated the way that he has been so gracious and so generous with his time and support. So without further ado, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm very good, Chase, and thanks for the lovely introduction. Okla was brilliant, so full of energy, and you yourself, very gracious, very smart. And it is an honor, and I think this is a great project for your students to let them know that poetry is alive and well, and there are people writing and reading, and to get them to be engaged in the world. It's very exciting. So I'm very honored to be here. Thanks for inviting me, and it should be fun.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again. And I agree with you that if there's one thing I hope to model from Okla and his way too short but brilliant literary career as a writer and publisher, was his intellectual generosity, the way that he sought out and uplifted and supported writers and artists and helped people, created a platform for them. I think that that's one of the most important things to do in the literary world, because that's what makes it a community, is when we support one another. So
Absolutely, absolutely.
awesome. So you're going to do some poems from two series that you contributed to As It Ought to Be over the last couple of years. One is a series of poems about your experience as a immigrant to America. And then the second series about raising your daughter in this current difficult political and cultural landscape. So the first poem that I would like you to read came from that first series, and it's called Our Neighborhood in Revere, Massachusetts.
Sure. Let me read the poem. Our neighborhood in Revere, Massachusetts. Listen, you've seen it before in countless movies and TV shows. No matter which city it is, the markers are the same. The sneakers and telephone wires, the cracked sidewalks, the potholes you try so hard to avoid, you almost hit the double parked cars. The graffiti on street signs and public buildings, the apartment complex and family houses slumped so close together that you can smell your neighbor's fried pork with rice, where you can taste the lemongrass, fish sauce, red chili, and brown golden garlic, as if your grandmother is cooking next door. Houses where English is not spoken, and the first image greeting you might not be Christ. Where you need to lift up the reservoir's lid and pull the string to flush the toilet. Where young men hang out on the front porch with broken windows and no future. An air conditioner sits on the brown grass. A mother walks down the sidewalk with some of her children running ahead of her. A baby in only a diaper, cradled to her chest. You've seen it on the local news, a young reporter staring, wide eyes, speaking with anxiety and concern about a shooting that claimed the lives of young bystanders, about a drug bust where police found some untold amount of coke, and you're shaking your head, wondering what the world has come to now that these foreigners are ruining our America. I was in the old neighborhood the other day with my fiance, fresh from grad school, studying post colonial literature and theory. We went there to pick up some curry. I scanned, trying to get a sense of the scene, making sure the car doors are locked. The streets, the smells, the sights remind me of the old days. The markets were all there, but the people that I knew were gone. Now they were Middle Easterners. I guess the United States was no longer at war with Southeast Asia.
Wow.
Thank
Poetry
you.
snaps there. So we have a question from one of my students. This is Kali Rohrbacher, and they asked, you beautifully capture what it was like for you growing up in America, doing so in a way that allows the reader to reflect on what they know about immigrants and the conditions that people are forced to live in. Most people would try to push away the feelings brought up by this memory, but as a poet, you have found a way to turn them into something that can send a message to others. My question about this poem is, how can you write so eloquently about such a personal subject like this, which brings up feelings about traumatic and emotionally scarring events? Is it always easy to write about events that make you feel emotional?
That's a really, really good question, Kali. Is it Kali?
Kali.
Okay, very,
Oh,
very good. It's just very, very smart and thoughtful. And I I write about people in my life as a way to honor them, and it helps when I wrote this poem 20 years after I left Revere. Um, so there's the lens of nostalgia, which helps to create that sense of pride in the people that we know, the people that I know, the Southeast Asian refugees. And in terms of the second part of your question, you write about things that you care about, even if it's traumatic and painful, because it will translate well onto the page and to the readers, to their hearts and minds. Um, and in this poem is a way of honoring this place. That was the first place that we lived as a family. Um, and then also to remind America that the reason refugees are in America has to do with American involvement in other places in the world. So for us, it was the Vietnam War that spilled over into Cambodia, uh, and that's one of the reasons why we're here. And now we have folks from other parts of the world, and I try to kind of you know break through, not only to break through that image of this sort of immigrant refugee urban landscape, and to give the kind of, for me at least, the flavor and the beauty of the place. For me, it's the food. It's uh, the fried pork with garlic and lemongrass that grandmother used to make, and so on. It's the food and the people, and I wanted to break through the stereotypes a little bit there and say, beyond the stereotypes, these are my people, and I'm proud of that. I don't know if that helps sort of answer the question there, but
Well, it answered it for me, and I especially the one thing you said that really registered to me is that you write about what you care about, and that using that word care, because that signified to me that you can love something that's traumatic, that because a traumatic experience is part of your life, but to say that I don't care about it would then be to take away something that shapes who you are. So that must be really hard to say I care about and love something, even though it was painful.
yeah, yeah, it's just a way of helping to deal with the difficult past, and helping to name it, and therefore to create boundaries around it, and to take some sort of control over it.
Mhm.
And I think you can talk about that in terms of other poems that I wrote too. But this is an example of that: writing about something that you care about, even though it's painful, and it's a way of, for me and for a lot of people that I know, a way of healing, and not necessarily closure. I don't think you could get closure in any in stuff, but you can work with it. You can work with it.
So speaking of working with it, I think that gives us a really good transition to the second poem, which is Snow Day.
Okay. Let me. Um, I'm looking for. Sorry about this, Chase.
Oh, no worries.
Uh,
Do you have the site up?
I do. I'm trying to Google it now to see if I have it here. Okay.
I love the fact that we
Okay,
can
I
use
got it.
Google to organize our own lives, as if Google does in fact know more about where I am in the world than I do at the moment.
Yeah. I have the poem here, so let me just read it, and then we can
Great.
talk about it. Snow day. Silent as night, the morning snow covered the school, the playground, a ghost town in the city near the beach. But no one told this refugee child about such a day. No one said to turn on the TV. No one called. He walked in the white field, looking up to the sky, raising his hands, letting his brown body fall backward into the white landscape, his eyes closed, each flake gently caressing his cheeks. Yes.
Awesome. So the question from my student is, the collection of three poems stood out to me as a reflection on the isolation an immigrant child faces in America. In Snow Day, when the speaker surrenders his brown body into the white landscape, does this imply cultural assimilation?
That's a really, really good question. Again, very smart and thoughtful, and thinking about the imagery. Um, I was, I was, I wasn't thinking about a conscious sort of desire for cultural assimilation. I was thinking more in terms of the first part of the question, which is really about isolation
Mhm,
and deep, deep loneliness. Here's a kid who didn't know what snow day was.
mhm,
His uncles and aunts were busy working at factories. Um, his grandmother was busy taking care of the younger cousins. And he's all by himself. And the place, the school, seems to be a ghost land, a ghost town. And uh, and the image is one of being swallow by this landscape of whiteness, and
Mm-hmm.
the character, the speaker, is a brown-skinned kid, and not surrender in terms of being giving into with a choice, but there isn't really much of a choice.
Mm-hmm.
There is the forces that surrounds you, because you know are a refugee or an immigrant and a person of color, and you're being surrounded, and there isn't much choice except that you're being swallowed up. You're being swallowed up by this landscape and this place and this culture. Um, um, and I think that's what happened with me. I grew up in the East Coast, in Revere and Malden, in the early '80s, and back then, especially in Malden, there were not many Asian American people, uh, and and the effect would be, feeling very lonely and alienated, and at, I think maybe instead of cultural assimilation, I didn't explore this in this particular poem because I was trying to capture that sense of being swallowed up. But the effects, I think, for me, was one of, like many others, racial shame,
Mm-hmm.
being shame and embarrassed of oneself, which translate to, the extreme,
Mm-hmm.
hatred and
Mm-hmm.
self-destruction. Which, oh, I'm working on this autobiographical novel that explores that. But you're right, though, in terms of that image. I think that's a really thoughtful image. And surrendering is a good word because it means that you can't fight anymore. uh,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have that will and power. And surrender means to give up on yourself, to give up that
Mm-hmm.
sense of love,
Mm-hmm.
sense of
Yeah.
self-preservation and self-love. But thanks for that's a really good reading of it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you surrender, you fly a white flag, right?
Yeah.
Just the whiteness of it. And yeah, I think that I got the same thing out of that poem, which was the way in which that the symbolism of the snow blankets everything white, which means things stand out. And and I saw how the way that maybe as a young person who, like you said in the poem, didn't understand what snow days were, and didn't feel that they quite fit into the culture. That's the funny thing, is that uh, being defined as a cultural other sometimes means you're both invisible and then suddenly you stand out.
Yeah.
So like I saw in that poem, like the juxtaposition of I was invisible to the world and now suddenly on snow day I stand out way too much.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that creates insecurity and anxiety
Mm-hmm.
and paranoia about being visible.
Mm-hmm.
There's a kind of state of contradiction, uh, um, in terms of being that visible minority.
Mm-hmm.
You're a minority, and yet you're standing out. Very, very good. Absolutely.
So I want to transition to then the series of poems about raising your daughter. And I think that that is a good transition point, because I think that same anxiety that you had as a child, and you remember now as a father, you're worried about that with how your daughter might process that. And I feel like that's in all of the poems from that series. So let's start that series with the poem Tightrope Dancer.
Okay. Tightrope dancer. You climb the 5 rung ladder at the children's playground. Your mother crouches below, holding breath. I stand behind, counting the plastic rungs. You kicked us away. I'm a big girl. Your mother prepares to catch your fall. Each day we hold our breath, cover our mouths with our hands, close our eyes and pray. Of course, we want you to reach the top, but not too fast and not too far from us. Thank you.
So Edwin Aguilar asks, Tightrope Dancer is one of my favorite poems that I read. The idea of parents watching us grow every day doesn't seem to bother us. And it's not until we watch our own children growing up that we develop a sense of worry and we want to stop time to prevent them from getting older. I was wondering, is the tightrope a symbol of the dangers we face as we get older? And is the excitement of playing on the tightrope our obliviousness?
Absolutely. You're right on, Edwin. You know, being a parent, you want to, of course, protect them from the dangers of the world, but you also know that uh, that they have to grow and that
Mhm,
they have to take risks, go out there in the world, um, and so it's this sort of balancing act of wanting to protect them, but also knowing that they need to go to the playground, they need to take the bus to school. If you have money, then you can send them to summer camps. They'll probably go out on dates, meet unsavory characters. They'll go to college away from you. These are parts of growing up, and it's very painful because it's about being independent and being separated. But you don't want them sometimes to be too independent where they're not dependent on you anymore. Um, so it's this strange balancing act of
mhm,
wanting so much to protect them, but also knowing that they have to grow and that they will eventually leave you or you will leave them. We don't have a lot of choices when it comes to growing old and you know
mhm,
this, that, and death and all that stuff. But the point is it's a very uh, it's a very you know precarious kind of thing to be a parent, and I love it. I love it because of the joy.
mhm,
This the joy of seeing somebody growing into a person.
mm,
It's so fascinating. And
mhm,
my daughter, is her own person now.
mhm,
But I don't know. Yeah, I think that's one of the aspect of that particular poem is these kids they love swings and going down slides and they're oblivious to responding
mhm,
to Edwin's question. They're oblivious to the dangers because they're relishing their exploration of the world, their enjoyment, their they're having fun. But man, you're worried. You're worried that they slip on, in
mhm,
terms of hanging onto the monkey bar, they'll slip. But they're enjoying themselves, and that's the you have a wonderful poem about your niece. What all that is about.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, through Zoom videos, I get to see each week, 7 days worth of growth in being a
Wow.
person. But like I think like what you said was ultimately um, part of the anxiety is that there are certain things that are inevitable in our lives, getting older, growing, pain, love, suffering, joy, all those things, but you don't know how they're going to manifest themselves. And they could go in so many different directions. And, I couldn't imagine having a child and being like, I know you're going to get your heart broken. I just don't know how it's going to happen or when it's going to happen. But knowing it's what's on the horizon, but not being able to do much about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
That's it's. I told my wife I don't look forward to that moment, but it's
No.
already happening now. It's already happening now. She's in the kindergarten,
But
and she's doing virtual kindergarten,
wow.
and
I don't even know what that is.
one thing
But like,
so
how do you do virtual finger painting?
yeah. How do you do virtual gym? They play a video of the coach doing jump rope or jumping jack, and my daughter will be doing the same thing.
Wow.
Um, and they'll play a video of finger painting. My daughter would try to do that. But the point is, you know, my daughter. this is going to be online and available. She's very shy.
Hmm.
She's very shy, and she wants to have friends and so on. And there's already little heartbreaks here and there,
Yeah.
and it's very difficult for my wife and I to see that, because we're both shy people, my wife and I.
Hmm.
So, our daughter comes by the shyness honestly, like through the genes, through the biology.
Hmm. That makes
Um,
sense.
so,
But so going to the kind of opposite end of this question of the life spectrum from birth and then passing, I want to talk about another poem, My Mother on Her Deathbed.
okay. Let me. I'm not sure what happened. I kind of I'm gonna Google it again. My mother on her deathbed.
And again, thanks to Google for organizing our lives better than we ourselves can. That's how I look for
Yeah,
everything in my life now is just I ask Google, where am I?
yeah.
And
All
they can
right.
tell you where you are.
My mother on her deathbed, withered away and pus, knowing that she'll leave me, her only child. My uncle's body crouched in fetal position on the red dirt of the refugee camp. Heavy boots and Thai soldiers thundering on his head, back, and stomach. Grandmother weeps at night for all her children, alive and dead, for her orphan grandson, for all parents haunted by helplessness. In America, I was the new kid, a reminder of a war that tore families apart. Saliva clung to my tear-stained cheeks and stuck to my hair. Stephanie, my first crush, said, "It's nothing personal." But these memories are wiped clean. All is forgiven. A flower blooms in the desert when my daughter hugs me.
Awesome. I love
Thank
how that
you.
poem goes full circle. So here is a question from Kara Nashif, and she wrote, I see in My Mother on Her Deathbed a new beginning, where you come to let go of certain painful memories and forgive those who caused them. Did composing this poem help bring closure to the parts of your past you talk about in the poem? Also, do the lines saliva clung to my tear-stained cheeks and stuck to my hair refer to a particular event?
Really, very good. Uh, the answer to the second question is yes. It was probably 1984, Halloween in Revere. Uh, kids being kids. There's stuff that happened to me in terms of being spat at and other things. Halloween's are yeah, Halloween's are scary things. For those are moments when the demons, the evil that is part of human ignorance and stupidity sort of come out. And it came out that night, and I was a victim of that. And that phrase appears in a couple of other poems because it was such a you know a crucial, painful moment in my life. So that did happen. In terms of the other question, and what you said makes a lot of sense. The poem is about memories swirling in my head,
Mhm.
and then it disappeared momentarily when my daughter hugs me or when I hold her, when she smiles or when we laugh. It momentarily, right? Because with that kind of joy and pleasure, it could erase in an instant all those painful memories, and I could
Mhm.
forgive. I could forgive. But then it's bittersweet because my daughter would ask me a question.
Mhm.
And I have poems coming out from these questions, such as, when are we going to Cambodia to visit your parents, Daddy? Of course, my parents are gone, but so it's bittersweet in the sense, though, the joy sort of erases the painful memory, but also the idea that my daughter will not meet her grandparents on my side.
Mm.
She only has one set, and it's on her mother's side. So it's a very strange situation. And the way I like the way you talked about the book, The Doctor Will Fix It. It's about a child survivor of the Cambodian genocide who carries these painful memories
Mhm.
into parenting. And and it's a struggle to balance the present situation of being a father who is supposed to be responsible and emotionally stable and all that stuff, and then sometimes your daughter just asks you a question, and it breaks everything down. Another example is she's in virtual kindergarten, and they learn about slavery recently,
Mm.
and she asks her mom, "Is Daddy going to become a slave because of his?"
Wow.
And in my head, it's like, how do we answer that
Oh
kind of
my
question in terms of how do
God.
we have a child learn about American sort of legacy of slavery and racism and violence and
Mhm.
so on? And she's putting things together because I'm lighter, I'm darker than my wife, therefore I'm in danger of being a slave.
Mhm.
How do you deal with that? Um, and yeah, it's children's are a gift because they ask you to reimagine and look at the world again and again and again because they're going through what you went through the other
Mhm.
before. um, and you know you don't make these things up. They're there as long as you pay attention to it, as long as you are alert and attentive to the world.
Wow. That is, I mean, I think that's one of the most valuable parts of that series of poetry that you wrote about raising your daughter is that it brings up all of the things that come with um, a person, a young person trying to navigate having multiple racial and ethnic identities in this country at this moment that people who don't have that experience may not have ever thought about. And since she's so young in these poems, there are things that she might forget later on that she experienced, but yet would still stick with her because that's the way trauma informs us, is that we still remember at some level a traumatic event, even if we've long forgotten consciously what exactly it was.
Yeah, yeah.
That so maybe we got time for one more poem,
Okay.
and this one is I think one of the more hopeful ones,
Yes.
and this one's Women's March in Albany.
Okay. Okay. Women's March in Albany. I take Chanda out on the stroller, lift her high up over my head, and put her on my shoulders so she can see that she's never alone. We are here for her, my wife and I, and other women and men too. We will march city streets, climb mountains, and cross rivers and jungles to let her know our strength is in our love for her, and her strength is felt in the trembling ground, the demands for autonomy, respect, and decency, no woman left behind, in speaking up and out, and hollering and screaming in songs.
Excellent.
Thank you.
And I like ending on a higher note, and that's exactly what my student noticed. So this was also from Gali Rohrbacher, and they wrote that Women's March in Albany gave me hope for all of the young daughters of the world right now. As a father, it is clear you have taken on the duty of helping your daughter embrace herself as a woman and empower the women around her. As a man raising a daughter, what has it been like to step into the world of feminism and standing up for women's rights? How does it compare to the way that other adult men in your life have treated women?
Uh, I think because I grew up in the States, uh, I have a very different perspective and different ways about gender roles and behaviors and actions and codes than my uncles. And that's really a given. Um, I yeah, I do the cooking. I help with child caring. I I stay up until 2 or 3 to take care of my boy, and then I wake up my wife from 3 o'clock to the morning. My wife will take care of
Mhm.
him.
Yeah.
So there's to answer that second part of the question, um, I'm a very different man than my uncles and aunts. My uncles
Mhm.
are, or and I wonder what they think of me. But this is how my family works, and it's my family, and it's my relationship with my wife and my children. I'm more active and engaged in terms of raising the kids.
So you've had to depart from what you had been taught as a man's role in the family in order to enact it the way that you know is best for raising your two kids.
Perfectly stated. Absolutely, absolutely. This is you know this is part of the story of families in transition when it comes to migration. You know, and I can't do, and I know it's wrong to do what my uncles did. Back then it was, and I think the roles are now sort of shifted a little, but not really, because the roles back then were comforting for men.
Mm-hmm.
They go out and do the work and they come back. They don't have to deal with the food. They don't have to deal with taking care of the children. Their job is pretty, like, just, and it's pretty close, right? You go out in the morning or early morning, you come back at 5, 6 o'clock, and your job is done.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas your wife's job, it's just 24/7. It's nonstop.
Mm.
Um, there, and I lucked out because I have a very good wife who helps me raise responsibility, our daughter, in terms of
Mm-hmm.
trying to instill a sense of confidence, a sense of self-love, uh,
Mm.
and self-preservation, trying
Mm-hmm.
to be critical of gender constructions and so on. So
Mm-hmm.
I really, it's not just me raising my daughter, it's my wife and I raising our daughter together. And that's really an important part of the narrative. And I lucked out because I have a wife who, is very understanding, very
Mm-hmm.
understanding about where I came from in terms of the culture, the patriarchal culture, but also know that the whole process is really a learning process to answer the real question. And it's a learning process because I'm still struggling. I'm still
Mm-hmm.
struggling. There are moments when I kind of like fall back in terms of, there's a poem, and we're probably running out of time, but there's one particular poem where I'm with my daughter and we're at the playground and there's a boy sort of chasing after her, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she's not comfortable with that. And the boy has, he's with his mother, and I kind of looked over and said, Janta, be nice to him, play. But I'm forcing her to do something she's not comfortable doing.
Mm-hmm.
That's just, I'm complicit in that. I should have been more respectful of
Mm-hmm.
her wishes. So
Mm-hmm.
there are places where I need to work on,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. So that's
But
that's the
the
poem
most
that I'm embarrassed about.
well, the fact that you would write a poem about that is just commendable. You're following that tradition of like confessional poets that are putting out there, and working through themselves in a poem. But also, like that's just part of being human. I feel that when we're put into new situations, we fall back on our received knowledges, our received codes, and the problem is that what we've received has not always been what's good or effective or what's right. And so suddenly we see ourselves acting against what our own personal beliefs are because that's just so hardwired driven into us. It's like one of those bad spy movies where they say the secret code and then the operative suddenly launches into what they're supposed to do, but they've been brainwashed to do. And one of the hardest things is to unlearn these behaviors. And that's just universal. We're all inflected with those kind of harmful ideologies. And the best we can do sometimes is to acknowledge it and work through that. But when the world hits you with something new, sometimes you start acting like a person you don't even know. And
Yeah,
it's because the world taught you to act that way. And you realize later, no, I need to do better or differently.
absolutely. And I really like your comparison in terms of being brainwashed in a state of slumber, and you fall back to something easy,
Yeah.
something comfortable, something that you're so used to.
Yeah.
And I think if there's anything that I would like to sort of get us to think about is to find a space of forgiveness and understanding. That we're all trying to be good. At least my understanding of a lot of us is that we're trying to be good people.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to. We're not perfect, and we're trying to rebuild
Mm-hmm.
the cultural values that are much more uh, fair and equal and just and yeah.
Yeah. I like what you said about rebuild, because a lot of who we are as people is built by what we grew up in. And so a lot of the material that we built ourselves out of didn't come from us, didn't come from our adult self saying, these are what are good values, and this is what I believe in, and this is what's good and equitable and fair and empathetic. A lot of what's gets put in us came from a toxic culture, a backwards culture, a culture that didn't have the understandings that we have now. And sometimes when you get put into a new position, you have a thought goes through your head, and you go, wait a second, where did that come from? And then you realize it's because 30 years ago, uh, that's what people thought. And I think it's about having that conscious thinking, understanding of where are my impulses coming and how can I do better? How can I be more empathetic and understanding and helpful instead of defensive?
Absolutely, absolutely,
And
absolutely.
and I think that's, but the like what I loved about those poems was the fact that you're just so conscientious about what it means to be a father and what it means to allow your daughter to be to you both want to defend her and protect her and support her, but also like I see these memes sometimes on Facebook, on Twitter, if people saying, like, if you want to date my daughter, and here's my rules, and like these these toxic masculine, these toxic ways of saying I own my daughter, and if you want to date her, you have to know that I own a gun or something. And
Yeah,
that's going, I mean, that's like medieval times,
yeah,
just
yeah,
with 21st century technology. So
yeah.
what I
That's
appreciate is the fact that your poems recognize the damage that that does, and is saying here is a really honest, open attempt to do the best I can.
yeah. I think that's pretty absolutely what you said there. Uh, um, you know, I grew up without parents, and I think I learned mostly from books, from literature, especially
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how to be a good person, how to be a man, and now how to be a father. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's uh, take what you will, but for me, literature is a way to reimagine myself and the world in in a better, positive way.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think growing up, if I were to follow some of my uncle's behaviors, I don't think that would be good.
It wouldn't be good for your daughter.
Yeah. uh, but I have to also give them give them this narrative that this is where they came from. This
Mm-hmm.
is their culture. They grew up with this, the first 30, 40 years. They came here in their mid 30s, so they're already in the matrix of a particular cultural view, and still in.
Mm-hmm.
So that I think we need to also consider. But the point has to do, at least for me, is that you know when a family moves from one place to another, a place that's so different, there's going to be shifts and changes and differences and tensions between the generations. And that's really a part of that narrative in
Mm-hmm.
terms of what does it mean to be a father or a husband.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it goes through that and I'm good. I think they're happy with me that I didn't go to prison. I didn't do any petty crimes. I'm a teacher at a very good place, in a very good department.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but they wanted me to be something different. Like, they knew I hated blood, so I can't be a doctor. And I was very shy, so I can't argue as a lawyer. So the next step would be, becoming an engineer. Um, and they didn't give me any present, but when I turned, I think 18, my uncle gave me this kit that has these sort of engineer type devices and stuff to suggest that's what I should be doing.
Right. Right. There's definitely always an ideology inside the presence that
Yeah.
you give usually children, but then I think all the way through adulthood, you're going to
Yeah.
get presents that essentially say, here's the way you need to live your life.
Yeah.
But
They're good.
uh,
They're good people. They're good people.
well, I think that just the central bravery of your poems about, especially about being a father, is the fact that you're putting your vulnerability on the line there and not presenting yourself as perfect, but as conscientious. And that actually counterintuitively is the best way, I think, to show that you love and care about somebody is by front loading and understanding where your weaknesses are or your insecurities or your anxieties are, understanding that, and then saying, knowing that this is where my difficulty is, admitting that, then that makes me better at caring for somebody, which it's hard to do because um, swallowing your ego is the hardest thing in the world to do, especially if you're a writer, because you have to have a little ego to be a writer and put your poems out into the universe.
Yeah, you do. You do. But when it comes to living life, I think it's freeing if you get rid of some of those ideas and just, you know, be
Yeah.
open and vulnerable and say, I'm not perfect. I'm not this or that, but I'm open to learning. I'm open to growing.
Yeah.
And that's the good part about it,
Yeah.
being that honest about yourself. And
Yeah. It's amazing. It makes you freer and it allows you to become better.
yep,
But
absolutely.
anyway, I've gone over time here because I decided that I was going to totally just fanboy out here at the end. But so I guess this is the poetry 45-minute episode. But anyway, so I want to thank you again for agreeing to come on here and read your poetry and answer these questions. I really appreciate the depth and introspection and vulnerability that you showed because that's not easy.
It's a pleasure and honor. And your student sounds amazing based on the questions. And
Well,
you sound like an incredible teacher, so well organized, so structured, and also uh, giving them this idea that poetry is not locked up in some old ancient texts of Beowulf or or Chaucer or Shakespeare or Milton or Pope, going through the British traditions there.
Hmm.
But there's that, but also there's the living poets writing and confronting and dealing with contemporary issues.
Yeah, or absolutely. And I think that once you understand that poetry is alive, that means that poetry has a place for you,
Yep.
which is good because sometimes the literary canon makes it seem like there's no place for you if you're only studying the Shakespeare's and the Chaucers and the Miltons. There's a
Yeah.
place for everybody as long as it's alive.
Yes. Own it, make it, be involved in it. And yeah, yeah, own it, own the canon. That is, make it your own.
Own it. If you don't like what's in the canon, assemble your own canon.
Absolutely,
We all have our own canons.
we do.
Uh, So anyway, I want to thank you one more time for coming on,
Pleasure, man.
and thank you to all my students who contributed these wonderful questions. And then our next poet in a few weeks will be Corey Wells. So I'm going to sign off now, but thank you again to all of our listeners and to my students. I'm looking forward to hearing your response questions in a week. Take care.